Most of us learned money the hard way. Nobody sat us down. Nobody gave us a system. We figured it out through mistakes, through debt, through the quiet panic of a bank account that did not add up. But here is what most people do not realize. That experience, learning money late, learning it badly, learning it through pain, is not universal. There is a group of families where that is simply not how it goes. Wealthy families, and I do not mean just rich, I mean genuinely, generationally wealthy. They do not leave money to chance. They do not wait until their kids are old enough to mess up. They teach a system, early, deliberately. And that system is what most people never see. That is exactly what we are getting into today. My name is Mila, and I'm obsessed with the small moves and hidden nuances that build real wealth. And today, we are talking about something I genuinely think is one of the most underrated conversations in personal finance. How wealthy families actually teach their children about money. Not the surface version, not jars and piggy banks and telling your kids to save. The real system, the one that produces adults who know how to earn, allocate, grow, and think about money before the world ever gets the chance to confuse them. Because here is the thing. And this is the core idea I want you to hold on to for this entire video. The 1% are not just raising children who have money. They are raising children who know what to do with money. That is the difference. And it is a bigger difference than most people realize. Having money without the skill to manage it is one of the fastest ways to lose it. We have seen it with lottery winners. We have seen it with inheritance stories that end in 10 years flat. Money without capability does not last. But capability, the habits, the structure, the thinking patterns, travels with a person everywhere they go. So what we are covering today are 12 things that financially sophisticated families tend to teach their children. And I have grouped them into 4 categories because they do not all serve the same purpose. The first category is about foundation. How wealthy families teach children to relate to work, value, and structure before anything else. The second is about control. How they teach children to manage money intentionally instead of just reacting to it. The third is about maturity. How they build patience, generosity, and accountability into the system. And the fourth is about wealth thinking. How they teach long-term identity, ownership, and legacy. Each category builds on the one before it. And that is intentional. Because this is not a random list of money tips. It is a sequence. It is a system. And by the end of this video, you will have all 12 pieces and a clear sense of how to actually apply them. No matter how young or old your children are, and honestly, no matter how you grew up around money yourself. Let's get into it. Lesson 1. Money is earned by creating value. The first thing wealthy families teach, and you might be surprised by how early this starts, is that money comes from value. Not from asking, not from simply being in the household, from contributing something useful. And honestly, when I say early, I mean early. We are talking below 5 years old in some of these families, before the child is even in school, because the 1% understand something most parents do not think about until much later, that the relationship a child builds with money at age 4 or 5 is quietly shaping how they think about income at age 30. Most families hand out a weekly allowance and mean well by it. But what the child actually learns from that is, money arrives. It just shows up. It is something you receive, not something you produce. And that one misunderstanding follows people for decades. Wealthy families flip that entirely. Money is connected to value from the very beginning. You help, you contribute, you do something useful. And that creates the conditions for earning. That is the association they are building. And by the time that child is a teenager, it is not even a lesson anymore. It is just how they see the world. And here's the other thing they are very intentional about. Work is never framed as a burden in these households. It is not the thing that steals time or takes you away from life. It is contribution. It is capability. It is how value gets created. And more value can mean more income. That idea, planted early enough, changes everything. Now, how this actually looks depends on where the child is developmentally. Around ages 5 to 7, it is incredibly simple. We are not talking about big tasks or real earnings. We are talking about small paid extras, things beyond what is normally expected. Helping to unload the dishwasher, wiping down the table after dinner, helping to sort laundry. The money itself is almost beside the point at this stage. What matters is the association being built. I did something useful. I was rewarded for it. That is the entire lesson at this age, and it is more powerful than most parents realize. Around 8 to 12, you start expanding the idea. This is where you might introduce something like a simple family job board, a visible list of optional tasks that have a dollar amount attached. Washing the car, organizing a storage area, helping with yard work. The child now has choices. They can do more and earn more, or do less and earn less. And that cause and effect relationship between effort and income starts to feel real and tangible to them. By the early teen years, you open the door even wider. Neighborhood services, babysitting, helping with a family business, a small side hustle, part-time work if it makes sense. Real earning, real value. Real proof that contribution and income are connected. The adult that grows from this foundation does not sit around waiting for money to arrive. They think differently. They ask, what value can I create here? Lesson 2. Not all work gets paid. Now here is where wealthy families do something really smart. Because after teaching a child that money comes from value, there is a risk. And the 1% see it coming from a mile away. The risk is the child starts thinking, okay, so everything I do should come with payment. I clean my room, where is my money? I help set the table, what do I get? So they draw a very clear line. And they do it with a simple 3-bucket framework that every parent can use immediately. The first bucket is personal responsibilities. These are things you do for yourself because you are a person who lives in this house. Making your bed, packing your school bag, keeping your personal space tidy, unpaid, always. The second bucket is family contributions. These are things you do simply because you are part of a family, and families take care of each other. Helping clear the whole table, including other people's plates, helping set up for dinner, tidying shared spaces, checking on a sibling, these are also unpaid. And this is important because if you put family contributions in the paid bucket, you are not teaching financial intelligence. You are teaching a child that love and care inside a family has a transaction attached to it. And that is a values problem, not a money lesson. The third bucket is value-add work. These are optional extras that go beyond both personal responsibility and family contribution. Things the household needs done that nobody is expected to just handle. This is where earning begins. 3 buckets. Personal responsibilities, family contributions, value-add work. The first 2 are never paid. The third one is where money enters the picture. Lesson 3. Every dollar has a job. Okay, so now the child understands that money comes from value. They understand the difference between responsibility, family contribution, and earning. Now, money is actually starting to come in. And this is where most families completely drop the ball. Because the child gets their few dollars and it just floats. There is no direction, no structure. They spend it, it is gone, and the cycle resets. Wealthy families do not let money float. Ever. And honestly, this might be one of the most important things I say in this entire video. The 1% teach their children from a very young age that every single dollar that comes in has a job before it gets spent. Money does not arrive and then sit there waiting to be consumed. It gets allocated, it gets directed, it gets assigned a purpose immediately. And the way they make this visible and real, especially for young children, is through what most people know as the jar system. But here's what most people miss about the jar system. It is not just a cute savings trick. It is the child's first experience of a budget. It is the first time money stops being one emotional pile and starts being something with structure and intention behind it. Now, how this plays out changes with age. Around ages 5 to 7, you keep it extremely simple and visual. 3 jars. Spend, save, give. The child can see the money. They can touch it. They can watch one jar fill up while another stays lower. The parent sets the percentages. Maybe 70% spend, 20% save, 10% give. The exact numbers matter less than the habit. What you are building at this stage is the automatic behavior of allocating before spending. That is the entire goal. Around 8 to 12, you keep the same structure, but you start adding a 4th category, invest. Now the child has 4 buckets, spend, save, give, invest. And this is where the conversations start getting more interesting because the child starts asking, what does invest actually mean? What happens to that money? And that question is exactly what you want them asking. By the early teen years, you start transitioning away from physical jars towards something more real. A bank account, simple digital tracking, a basic written budget. The categories stay the same, but the tools grow with the child. And by this point, the behavior is so deeply ingrained that allocating money before spending it does not feel like discipline. It just feels normal. And that is exactly the point. Wealthy families are not trying to create children who are rigid about money. They are trying to create children for whom structure around money is completely automatic, so that by the time they are adults handling real income, the system is already running. That is the foundation layer. And it has to come first, because without it, nothing in the next category holds. Category 2, control. The second category is control, and there are 3 lessons here. Now, here's what the 1% understand about this stage that most families completely miss. Most parents think teaching kids about money means teaching them to save a little and not spend everything. And that is not control. That is just hoping for the best. Wealthy families know that the real danger is not a child who spends too much. The real danger is a child who has no relationship with intentionality around money, who sees money and reacts, who gets paid and immediately starts thinking about what to buy, because that child becomes an adult who earns well and still ends up with nothing at the end of every month. And that is one of the most common financial stories there is. So, this category is about training the child to be deliberate, to pause, to think before spending, to save not because they have to, but because it becomes completely natural, and to understand, for the first time, that money can actually work for them while they sleep. These 3 lessons shift the child from someone who earns and consumes to someone who earns and directs. And that shift is everything. Lesson 4. Spending is a choice, not a reflex. Here is something wealthy families understand about children that most parents do not act on quickly enough. A child's natural default with money is to spend it. The moment it arrives, the brain is already thinking about what to buy. And that is not a character flaw. That is just how the brain works when nobody has taught it to pause. The 1% interrupt that reflex early, and deliberately. They teach their children that spending is a choice, not an automatic response to having money in their hand. A conscious, I considered decision. And the way they do that is by introducing one deceptively simple habit: the pause. Before any purchase, the child is asked a question. Do you actually want this? And then a second question. Is this worth what you are giving up to have it? Because here's what that second question is really teaching. Opportunity cost. Every time you spend money on one thing, you are choosing not to spend it on everything else. That is not a concept most adults even think about consciously. Wealthy families are teaching it to 5-year-olds. And look, I want to speak directly to the parent who is watching this right now thinking, my child is too young for this. They will not understand. Or honestly, I just do not want to deal with the tantrum. Because I hear that. I do, but I need you to stay with me here for a second. Researchers at Cambridge University actually found that money habits and attitudes are largely formed by age 7. Age 7. That means the window is not when they get their first job or when they leave for college. The window is right now. And most parents are unknowingly letting it close without putting anything useful inside it. And here is the other thing. Children are far more capable of this thinking than we give them credit for. You may have heard of the marshmallow experiment, where young children were given a choice between eating 1 marshmallow immediately or waiting and getting 2. What that research showed was that children as young as 4 can grasp the concept of waiting for something better. They are not too young. They just need someone to make the concept visible and real for them. Which is exactly what wealthy families do. Now, how this looks in practice changes with age. Around 5 to 7, it is beautifully simple. The child wants something. The parent points to the spend jar. Is there enough in there? If yes, it is their choice. If no, they wait. That is it. The lesson at this age is not about deep financial strategy. It is about the basic experience of a limit. Money is finite. You cannot spend what you do not have. That feeling of looking at the jar and making a decision is more valuable than it looks. And yes, there may be a tantrum the first time, or the second time, but wealthy families do not avoid the lesson because of the tantrum. They know the tantrum is temporary. The habit is permanent. Around 8 to 12, the conversation gets richer. Now you start introducing comparison. Yeah, you want this toy that costs $15, but you have also been talking about that game that costs $40. If you buy this now, how much longer until you can get the thing you actually want more? That is a real trade-off conversation. And children this age can absolutely have it. They just need someone to initiate it. By the early teen years, the habit is deepening into something more sophisticated. Wants versus priorities. Impulse versus intention. The teenager who has grown up with this practice does not just pause before spending. They have internalized the question. They ask themselves automatically. And that is the version of them you are building toward. Lesson 5. Saving is normal, not optional. Here is how most people grow up thinking about saving. You earn money, you spend what you need. And if there is anything left at the end, you save that. Saving is the leftover. Saving is the afterthought. Saving is what happens when you were lucky enough not to spend everything first. And then people wonder why they cannot seem to build anything. Wealthy families teach the complete opposite, and they teach it early. In these households, saving is not what happens after spending. Saving comes first. It is built into the system before any spending decision is even made. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is not optional. It is just what you do with money when it arrives. And this is something the 1% understand deeply. That saving has to become so automatic, so habitual, so completely normal, that the child never has to motivate themselves to do it. Because motivation runs out, structure does not. The research actually backs this up in a fascinating way. Studies on habit formation consistently show that behaviors which are made automatic, built into a system rather than left to willpower, are dramatically more likely to stick long-term. Wealthy families are not raising children who have to convince themselves to save. They are raising children for whom saving is simply the next step after earning. No debate, no negotiation, no maybe this month. Now, how this looks in practice changes with age. Around 5 to 7, the amount is almost irrelevant. What matters at this stage is the repetition. Every single time money comes in, some goes into the save jar. Every time, without exception. The child does not decide whether to save this week. That decision has already been made. And that consistency, that non-negotiable rhythm, is what plants the habit so deeply it becomes invisible. Around 8 to 12, saving starts to get more interesting because now you attach it to something specific. This is where you introduce the concept of saving toward a goal. Maybe it is a toy they really want. Maybe it is a game. Maybe it is something bigger than their spend jar could ever handle at once. And now, saving has a purpose beyond just because we always do it. The child starts to feel the satisfaction of watching a goal get closer. That feeling is one of the most powerful financial motivators there is, and they are learning it before most adults ever experience it intentionally. By the early teen years, you start moving toward real accounts, a savings account at an actual bank, a visible balance that grows, and conversations about what that growing balance makes possible, not just now, but later. The teenager who has been saving since they were 5 does not find this transition hard. It is just the next natural evolution of something they have always done. The adult that comes from this foundation does not struggle to start saving. They have never known a version of themselves that does not. Lesson 6. Money can grow while you sleep. This is the one that changes everything. This is the lesson that takes the system from disciplined to genuinely exciting. And I want you to pay close attention here, because this is where wealthy families introduce an idea that most adults do not fully understand until their 30s, if ever. The idea is this: money can work. Not just be worked for, not just be saved, not just be spent. It can actually go out into the world and come back bigger than it left. And the 1% do not wait until their children are old enough to open a brokerage account to introduce this concept. They start the moment the save jar has enough in it to make the lesson visible. Here is how they do it at the youngest ages. The parent becomes the bank. The child has money sitting in their save jar, and the parent says, "I will pay you extra just for keeping that money with me. Every month you leave it there, I will add a little on top." That is interest. That is the basic mechanics of money growing. And to a 6-year-old watching their jar total go up without doing anything extra, that is magic. That is the moment the concept of passive growth becomes real and tangible and exciting. And here is what that moment actually does psychologically. It shifts the child's relationship with saving from restraint to strategy. Saving is no longer just about not spending. Saving is now about putting money somewhere it can multiply. That is a completely different motivation. And it is a much more powerful one. Now, the research here is genuinely staggering. Albert Einstein, and look, whether he actually said this or not is debated, but the math is undeniable. is often credited with calling compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, because the numbers are almost hard to believe until you see them laid out. Money invested early enough, left alone long enough, does not just grow, it accelerates. The growth compounds on itself. And the single biggest factor in how much you end up with is not how much you invest. It is how early you start. Wealthy families understand this in their bones, which is why they are introducing the concept before the child even knows what a stock market is. Now, how this evolves with age. Around 5 to 7, the parent bank is the whole lesson. You keep money here, it grows. Simple, visceral, real. The child does not need to understand compounding mathematically, they just need to feel it. Around 8 to 12, you start expanding the conversation. What is a bank actually doing with your money? What does it mean to earn interest? What is the difference between money sitting in a jar and money sitting somewhere it can grow? This is also the age where the fourth jar, the invest jar, starts to become more meaningful. The child now has a dedicated place for money that is specifically intended to grow. By the early teen years, you open the door to real investing conversations. What is a stock? What does it mean to own a small piece of a company? What is an index fund? How does long-term growth actually work? Some families at this stage will open a custodial investment account and let the teenager watch real money grow in real time. And I promise you, nothing teaches compounding faster than watching your own money go up. The adult who grows from this foundation does not think of money as something you just store. They think of it as something you deploy. Something that works, something that grows while they sleep. And that mindset, installed before the age of 10 in many of these households, is one of the most significant financial advantages a person can carry into adulthood. That is control, and by this point, the child has a real system. They know how to earn, how to allocate, how to pause before spending, how to save automatically, and how money can grow. That is not a small thing. That is more than most adults were ever taught. But here's what the 1% know that makes their approach different from just a financial system. Money without character is incomplete, so now we go deeper. Category 3, maturity. The third category is maturity. 3 lessons live here. And this is the part most financial parenting advice skips entirely. Because it is easier to talk about jars and interest and budgets than it is to talk about patience, generosity, and consequences. But wealthy families do not skip this. Because they understand something important. A child can have the most perfectly structured money system in the world and still grow into an adult who makes terrible financial decisions if the character layer is missing. The 1% know that money reveals who you are, and so they use money deliberately to build who their child is becoming. Not just financially, as a person. These 3 lessons are what separate a financially educated child from a financially mature one. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Lesson 7. Delayed gratification creates better options. Let me ask you something. Have you ever bought something, got home with it, and within a week completely forgotten why you wanted it so badly? Most people have, and most people chalk it up to impulse. But what is actually happening in that moment is something behavioral psychologists have studied for decades. And it has a name: present bias. The brain is wired to overvalue what is available right now and undervalue what is available later. It is not a weakness. It is literally how human brains are built. And wealthy families know this, so they train against it early. The lesson is not simply, do not spend. That is too blunt and honestly too negative to build anything meaningful from. The lesson is far more powerful than that. The lesson is, waiting often creates better options. And the child who learns to wait is not depriving themselves. They are positioning themselves. This is a distinction the 1% are very intentional about making. Because there is a difference between teaching a child to be frugal and teaching a child to be strategic. Frugal feels like restriction. Strategic feels like intelligence. And wealthy families want their children to feel intelligent, not deprived. Now, the marshmallow experiment we mentioned earlier fits perfectly here. What that research ultimately showed was not just that some children could wait. It showed that the children who were able to delay gratification tended to have better outcomes across multiple areas of life: academically, financially, socially. The ability to wait is not just a money skill, it is a life skill. And it can be practiced and strengthened just like a muscle. Now, how this looks in practice with age. Around 5 to 7, you keep it beautifully concrete. The child wants something small, a toy, a treat, or something they can see and touch. And you introduce a simple choice. You can have this small thing now, or you can wait and get something bigger later. And then you make the waiting visible. A chart on the wall, a jar filling up, something they can check every day and watch getting closer. At this age, the lesson is not about the money. It is about the experience of waiting and discovering that what they get at the end was worth it. Around 8 to 12, the concept deepens. Now, you start connecting waiting to the interest idea from lesson 6. If you leave that money in your save jar for another 2 months, it will grow. If you spend it today, you lose both the thing you are saving for and the growth. Now, the child is doing a real calculation. Now, delayed gratification has a mathematical reward attached to it, and not just an emotional one. By the early teen years, the conversation becomes genuinely sophisticated. You start talking about opportunity cost in a real way. Every financial decision closes some doors and opens others. Spending now is a choice, but so is waiting. And sometimes the most powerful financial move you can make is simply, not yet. The adult who builds from this foundation is not someone who never spends. They are someone who spends intentionally, who knows the difference between want and priority, who can sit with discomfort long enough to make a better decision. And in a world designed to separate people from their money as fast as possible, that ability is genuinely rare and genuinely powerful. On Lesson 8, giving is part of wealth. Now, this one surprises people, because when most people think about what wealthy families teach their children, they think about earning more, saving more, growing more. And then this lesson shows up, giving. And honestly, this is one of the most revealing things about how the 1% actually think about money. Because they do not teach their children that wealth is about accumulation alone. They teach their children that wealth includes generosity. That giving is not what you do after you have enough. It is part of the system from the very beginning. And here's why that matters more than it might seem on the surface. A child who grows up never giving develops a very particular relationship with money. A tight one, a fearful one. A relationship where money is something you grip rather than something you direct. And that kind of relationship with money does not produce wealthy adults. It produces anxious ones. Wealthy families use giving to teach something much bigger than charity. They use it to teach abundance, to teach that there is enough. That money is a tool that can do good in the world, and that being part of that feels genuinely good. That generosity is not a drain on wealth. It is actually one of the healthiest expressions of it. And they make it tangible. They do not just talk about giving in the abstract. They make it visible, specific, and the child's own choice. Now, how this looks in practice with age. Around 5 to 7, giving needs to be concrete and immediate. This is not the age for abstract charity conversations. You take the child to drop something off for a family in need. You let them put coins in a collection box and watch where it goes. You connect giving to a face or a place they can actually picture. The give jar is not just a jar, it is a destination. And the child gets to decide where it goes. That ownership over the decision is what makes it meaningful rather than mechanical. Around 8 to 12, you start having richer conversations. What causes matter to you? Is there something in the world that bothers you that you wish was different? Because now we have money set aside specifically to do something about that. This is where a child starts developing their own values around giving. And that is a deeply formative experience. A child who has chosen where their money goes, who has felt the weight of that decision, and the satisfaction of following through, carries something into adulthood that cannot be taught any other way. By the early teen years, giving becomes more intentional and more personal. The teenager might research organizations. They might give time as well as money. They might connect giving to their growing understanding of how systems work and where gaps exist. And the conversation inside the family starts to include bigger ideas about stewardship, about impact, about what it means to have resources in a world where not everyone does. The adult who grows from this foundation does not see giving as a subtraction from their wealth. They see it as an expression of it. And that relationship with money, generous, grounded, and abundant, is one of the most quietly powerful things a family can pass down. Lesson 9. Money decisions have consequences. Okay, this is the lesson that makes everything else real. Because here's the truth. You can set up the most beautifully structured system in the world. The jars, the buckets, the allocations, the saving goals, the giving conversations. All of it. and then undo every single lesson in one moment by doing this one thing, rescuing the child from the consequences of their own money decisions. And I want to be careful here because I am not talking about being harsh. I'm not talking about letting a child suffer or go without something they genuinely need. I am talking about something much more specific. When a child makes a choice with their money, a real choice, and with their own allocated money, and that choice does not work out, wealthy families let them feel it. They do not rush in and fix it. They do not quietly replace what was spent. They let the consequence land. Because they understand something most well-meaning parents miss entirely. The most expensive financial mistakes in life are the ones that happen when the stakes are high, and the best time to practice recovering from a bad money decision is when the stakes are still low. When the consequence is a disappointed feeling and an empty spend jar, not a missed rent payment or a maxed-out credit card. This is actually one of the most loving things a parent can do. Let the lesson be small now, so it does not have to be devastating later. And here is what wealthy families never do. They never say, okay, fine. I will give you a little extra this week because you already spent yours. That sentence, as kind as it feels in the moment, quietly teaches the child that consequences are negotiable, that someone will always come, that the system does not really apply to them. And that belief right there, is one of the most financially destructive things a person can carry into adulthood. Now, how this looks in practice with age. Around 5 to 7, the consequence is simple and immediate. The spend jar is empty. There is nothing left to buy the thing they want right now. And the answer is, I know that feels disappointing. We will not be adding extra this week. That is it. No lecture, no long explanation, just the natural result of the decision they made. And the feeling that comes with it, that mild but real disappointment, is the entire lesson. Around 8 to 12, the consequences become a little more layered. Maybe they spent their save money on an impulse buy, and now the goal they were working toward is further away. Maybe they chose not to do the value-add work this week, and now they do not have enough for something they wanted. Whatever it is, you let it play out, you empathize, you do not minimize. But you also do not solve it for them. You sit with them in it, and you let them figure out what comes next. By the early teen years, the stakes are naturally higher and the lessons get more sophisticated. A teenager who has been living inside the system for years already has a developed instinct for consequence. They have felt it enough times at low stakes that they genuinely think twice before making impulsive decisions. The habit of pausing, of thinking about what comes after, is already built in. The adult who grows from this foundation does not expect to be rescued. They make decisions, they own the outcomes, and they know how to course correct. And in a world where financial mistakes can follow people for years, that ability to take responsibility and recover is one of the most valuable things a person can have. That is maturity. And by this point, the child is not just financially structured. They are financially formed. They understand patience, generosity, and accountability. They have real character built around money. But the 1% do not stop here. Because what comes next is what separates a financially capable child from one who is being raised to think like an owner, and that is a different level entirely. Category 4. Wealth thinking. The fourth and final category is wealth thinking. 3 lessons live here, and this is the part that makes this approach genuinely generational. Because everything up to this point has been about building a child who handles money well. This category is about building a child who thinks about money differently from most people around them, who sees the world not just as a place to consume, but as a place to participate in, own a piece of, and ultimately shape. Here is what the 1% understand that most families never get to. Financial skill without financial identity only goes so far. A child needs to see themselves as someone who builds, owns, and thinks long-term, not just someone who manages their spending correctly. This is where the system becomes a worldview. And worldviews, unlike habits, are almost impossible to unlearn. Lesson 10. Money should be discussed openly. Here is something that will tell you almost everything you need to know about how a family relates to money. Ask a child from that household one simple question. Can you talk to your parents about money? In most households, the answer is complicated. Money is tense, money is private, money is the thing adults argue about behind closed doors or avoid discussing altogether. Children pick up on that energy very early, and what they learn, without anyone saying it out loud, is that money is a source of stress, shame, or secrecy. And they carry that emotional charge into their own adult lives without even realizing where it came from. Wealthy families do something completely different. They make money a normal topic, a regular conversation, something that gets discussed at the dinner table without drama, without tension, and without the sense that it is too adult or too complicated for young ears. And I want to be clear about what this does not mean. It does not mean telling your children everything about your finances in graphic detail. It does not mean putting your stress on them or making them feel responsible for adult problems. It means making money visible, discussable, and emotionally neutral. It means creating a household where a child feels comfortable asking questions about money and getting real, calm, honest answers. Because here is what the 1% understand. A child who grows up in a household where money is discussed openly does not become an adult who avoids their bank statements, who panics when a financial conversation comes up, who makes decisions in secret because they are embarrassed about where they stand. They become an adult who can talk about money clearly, ask for help when they need it, and engage with their own finances without shame. And the way wealthy families keep this alive is through rhythm, regular money conversations built into the fabric of family life. Not lectures, not sit-down interventions, just consistent, low-pressure check-ins that keep money visible and normal. Now, how this looks in practice with age. Around 5 to 7, you keep it incredibly short and light. After the child interacts with their jars, you ask simple questions. What did you decide to do with your spend money this week? How is your save jar looking? Did your give jar grow? You are not teaching in these moments. You are just making money a thing the family talks about easily and often. 2 minutes, no pressure, just normal. Around 8 to 12, the conversations get a little more structured. Maybe once a month you sit down together and talk through how the system is going. What are they saving toward? How is the goal progressing? Did anything feel hard this month? What would they do differently? This is where the child starts developing the ability to reflect on their own financial behavior. And that reflective capacity, the ability to look at your own money decisions and think honestly about them, is something most adults never develop. By the early teen years, the conversations become genuinely collaborative. You start sharing more about how the household thinks about money, how decisions get made, what trade-offs look like at a bigger scale. You bring them into real conversations, not to burden them, but to educate them. And the teenager who has grown up in a household where money was always discussable takes that ease into their adult relationships, into their friendships, into their romantic partnerships, into their workplaces. They are not the person who avoids money conversations. They are the person who initiates them clearly and calmly. And in a world where financial silence causes so much damage, that ease is a genuine gift. Lesson 11. Ownership matters more than consumption. Okay, this is the one. This is the lesson that is most distinctly, most specifically, most unapologetically 1%. And I want you to really hear this because it is the shift in thinking that separates people who build wealth from people who simply earn and spend for their entire lives. Most of us were raised to be consumers. And I do not mean that as an insult. It is just the truth. We were taught to work, earn, and then buy things. Nice things. Comfortable things. Things that signal success and feel good and make life enjoyable. And there is nothing wrong with enjoying what you earn. But if that is the whole picture, if consumption is the entire goal, then wealth never actually builds. Because consumption, no matter how sophisticated, is always a subtraction. Wealthy families teach their children something fundamentally different. They teach them that the world is not just a place to buy from. It is a place to own a piece of. And they start making that idea visible astonishingly early. Here is how it sounds in practice. A young child is eating at McDonald's or wearing Nike sneakers or playing a Nintendo game. And the parent says, you could actually own a tiny piece of the company that makes this. You could be one of the people that benefits every time someone else buys this. That is what a stock is. That is what investing means. You are not just a customer, you can be an owner. And I want you to sit with what that sentence does to a child's brain, because it completely reframes their relationship with the commercial world around them. Suddenly, brands are not just things to want and buy, they are things to potentially own. And that shift from consumer identity to owner identity is one of the most powerful financial reframes a person can ever experience. Wealthy families are giving it to their children before they are 10 years old. Now, why does this matter so much? Because research consistently shows that the majority of generational wealth is built not through income, but through ownership, through assets, through holding pieces of things that grow in value over time. The highest earning salary in the world, spent entirely on consumption, produces a comfortable life, but it does not produce lasting wealth. Ownership does. And the earlier a person understands that distinction, the earlier they can start acting on it. Now, how this looks in practice with age. Around 5 to 7, the concept is purely conversational. You are planting a seed, not opening an account. You point to a brand they recognize and you say, people can own a piece of that company. When that company does well, the people who own a piece of it do well too. That is it. You are not explaining the stock market. You are just introducing the idea that ownership exists and that it is available to regular people. Around 8 to 12, the conversation gets more specific. You start using brands and companies they genuinely interact with every day. The coffee you buy, the phone you use, the streaming service they watch. You ask, do you know that company is publicly traded? Do you know what that means? You start making the concept tangible and connected to their actual lived experience. Some families at this stage will introduce a very small symbolic investment, not for the financial return, but for the education of watching real money move in a real account connected to a real company. By the early teen years, the conversation becomes genuinely investment-focused. What is an index fund, and why do so many wealthy people use them? What is the difference between owning one company and owning a small piece of thousands of companies? What does long-term growth actually look like when you leave money invested and do not touch it? These are conversations that most adults have never had. Wealthy families are having them with their 15-year-olds, and the adult that comes from this foundation sees the world differently. They walk through life not just as someone who participates in the economy by spending, but as someone who participates by owning. That identity shift changes everything about how they approach income, investing, and long-term financial decisions. The 1% are not just raising children who have money. They are raising children who understand that owning a piece of the world that creates value is how money actually multiplies. Lesson 12. Real wealth is passed down as skill, not cash. And here we are, the final lesson. And I want to take a moment before we get into it because everything we have covered, all 11 lessons, all 4 categories, has been building to this one idea. And if you take nothing else from this video, I want you to take this. Money without the skill to handle it is temporary. Always. We have seen it over and over again. Lottery winners who are broke within a few years, inheritance stories that end in a decade, trust fund children who cannot hold a budget together. And people look at those stories and think, well, that is just irresponsible behavior. But it is not, or at least it is not only that. It is what happens when someone receives money without ever receiving the capability to manage it. When the cash arrives, but the conditioning never did. Wealthy families understand this at a level most people never articulate, and it changes how they think about what they are actually passing down to their children. The question most parents ask is, how do I set my children up financially? And they think about that in terms of money. Savings accounts, inheritance, paying for college, leaving something behind. And those things matter. I am not dismissing them. But the 1% ask a different question entirely. They ask, am I raising a child who will know what to do with money when they have it? Because if the answer to that question is no, then the money itself is not an advantage. It is just a delayed problem. The real inheritance is not the cash. It is the capability. And capability is not taught in one conversation. It is not taught in a single lesson about saving or a one-time talk about investing. It is built through repetition, through structure, through systems that run consistently over years, through small consequences that teach real lessons, through regular conversations that make money normal, through a childhood spent inside a framework that trains the brain to think about money in a particular way. That is what we have been talking about this entire video. Not tips, a system, a conditioning process, one that starts before a child can even read and evolves all the way through to adulthood. And here's the thing that should feel both sobering and deeply encouraging at the same time. You do not have to be wealthy to give your child this. You do not have to have grown up with it yourself. You do not have to have had perfect financial habits your whole life. Because this is not about perfection. It is about intention. It is about deciding that your child will not learn money the hard way. That the cycle of confusion, of late learning, of financial stress and shame stops here, with you. in your household. That is what the 1% figured out. Not that money itself is the gift, but that raising a child who knows what to do with money, who has the habits, the structure, the patience, the generosity, the accountability, the ownership mindset, that is the gift. That travels with them everywhere they go, into every job, and every relationship, every financial decision they will ever make. And unlike cash, it cannot be lost, spent, or taken away. So here is what I want to leave you with. You watched this video for a reason. Maybe you are a parent already. Maybe you are thinking about becoming one. Maybe you are watching this thinking about the child you once were, and everything nobody taught you. Whatever brought you here, that instinct matters. That desire to do it differently, to give a child something real, to break a cycle. That is where this all starts. You do not need to implement all 12 lessons tomorrow. You do not need a perfect system by next week. You just need to begin one conversation, one jar, one honest answer to a question your child asks about money that you would have avoided before today. That is how the cycle changes. Not dramatically, quietly, consistently, over time, and that is enough. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you clarity or shifted something for you, please subscribe because there is so much more where this came from. And always remember, luxury is easier when your money is organized. I will see you in the next one, and I love you.